Let's take some time to look into a couple of these songs from the first half of 1966 in a little bit more detail and maybe flesh out some of the kinds of things that I was talking about in the previous video about influence, about form, instrumentation, and some of the things that are going on. The four songs I've chosen to talk about at this point are 19th Nervous Breakdown, Painted Black, Mother's Little Helper, and Under My Thumb. Let's start with 19th Nervous Breakdown. Is this another kind of dissatisfaction? Remember, I can't get no satisfaction. Well, 19th Nervous Breakdown was released in the UK with As Tears Go By as the B-side, and it was released in February of 1966, going to #1. At the same time, it was released in the US with the song Sad Day as the B-side. And I have to tell you, I think Sad Day is a fantastic little pop song and very progressive in the way that it uses tonal materials, that is the way the notes and harmonies and stuff go together. It's kind of an overlooked song, but for me, it's a great instance of the Rolling Stones trying new and different kinds of things. Of course, they put it on a B-side, I understand that, but still, check out Sad Day. We won't have to get too much of a chance to talk much more about it in this course, but I recommend it highly. Both 19th Nervous Breakdown and Sad Day were recorded at RCA in December of 1965. The form of 19th Nervous Breakdown is what I call an AABA form with partial reprise. That is, you get an intro, which features, again, a guitar lick. Remember, we talked about 1965 as kind of being the year of the guitar lick intro, and think about all of the three big Stones hits, Last Time with that guitar lick, here I am playing it, the guitar lick for Last Time, and then the famous one for I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And of course, there's also kind of a little guitar lick that accompanies all the way through Get Off of My Cloud. Of course, there's the Beatles songs, Day Tripper, I Feel Fine, Ticket to Ride, all of which have got these kind of guitar intros. So in that way, this one, 19th Nervous Breakdown, very much a part of all of that still. Starts out with this little guitar lick, and then we get an A verse, and notice the fuzz guitar lick throughout this thing, that whenever they get to that one point and the guitar is isolated and you hear that fuzz guitar. Again, is this trying to use the gimmick or the gizmo from I Can't Get No Satisfaction and putting it into one of their later singles? Maybe. But anyway, just note that and see what you think. So we get an intro, an A verse, a bridge, and then an A verse. Now that's the AABA form. And then we reprise it in the sense that we bring some of it back, and in this case we bring back the bridge and the verse, and then there's a coda that takes the song out. So an AABA with partial reprise, we've seen this before. This is a fairly typical song form that they're using here. The lyrics deal with a socialite who's been emotionally damaged by her parents, who gave her everything except the love she needed. And she's also been treated poorly by a boyfriend, which our narrator tells us has made her quite mean. And so this has not only made her mean, but it has made her very emotionally unstable. And so, as the lyrics remind us, this may be her 19th nervous breakdown, I guess, meaning that she's had 18 before this. It could also be that, why pick 19th as it's actually 19th nervous breakdown. It's got a kind of a nice verbal kind of flow to it, right? But it could be that 19th nervous breakdown is an extension of the idea of 19th birthday or 19th birthday party. So think of a young woman who comes from money, who's having a big kind of 19th birthday party, and the smart remark is, yeah, you guys, maybe it's our 19th birthday party, but it's also our 19th nervous breakdown. Now there's nothing in the lyrics that say birthday party. I'm just laying my own interpretation on this. But what I'm trying to do is delve into what it is that Mick and Keith are trying to get into here. And they're trying to get into this idea of criticizing somebody who seems to have everything except the very thing that's most important to them. And they lead a life on the outside that seems to be full of all the best of things, but on the inside is dark and bitter and full of despair. That they're dealing with those kinds of issues in a lyric, to me, indicates that they're taking their lyrics much more seriously. They're still talking about girls and the kind of romantic kind of thing, but they're trying to dig into it with a little bit more depth and awareness and a kind of adult sensibility than they might have if they were just writing simple pop songs for the AM market. Well, if 19th Nervous Breakdown is about another kind of dissatisfaction, I would say Painted Black is really about something I might call existential angst, or the idea of, trying to come to terms with not only your own mortality, but the mortality of others around you. And it's not usually the kind of thing that young people in their early 20s think a lot about. Now, certainly teenagers will romanticize death and early death and this kind of thing. But I think the way that Mick and Keith portray it here is a little bit more thoughtful than just kind of, teen angel or king or a leader of the pack or some kind of death disc like that from the early 1960s. Well, the track, Painted Black, is in the American version, the B-side released in May, going to #1, Painted Black does. The B-side of the American version is a song called Stupid Girl. I'm going to come back at the end of this video to the idea of a song called Stupid Girl. How does that fit into some of the other things that we're talking about? And in the UK version, the song that's on the B-side is called Long, Long While. That's released at about the same time in May, also going to #1. Again, with all this stuff produced by Andrew Oldham. And recorded at RCA, both Painted Black, Stupid Girl, and Long, Long While were all recorded in March of 1966 at RCA. Now, as we look at Painted Black, it starts with that intro, that famous sort of solo guitar intro, not exactly the kind of lick intro. If it's a lick intro like we saw in 19th Nervous Breakdown, it's a much sort of quieter lick. And then it breaks into that almost sort of ritualistic rhythm thing with the sitar doubling the melody of the verse. It's what we call a simple verse form, which means it just does verse, 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 verse 5 times for the verse, and the coda is essentially the same material that's made up of the verse. And as it gets to the end, it gets increasingly kind of intense and ritualistic, and so you get this almost kind of ethnic kind of feel created by the sitar, the invocation not only of India, but also of a kind of almost ritualistic kind of dance. Well, the lyrics deal with grief at the death of a loved one, likely a girlfriend. And so the song really talks about how somebody just cannot deal with anything in their life that is colorful or involved. Color becomes a kind of metaphor for joy and life, and black becomes a metaphor for sort of darkness and depression and just angst, right? And so the lyrics tell us that all these colorful things that are happening around, you have to turn away from those. You would want it all black instead of colorful. Well, there's a resonance here with a song recorded at about the same time by the Beatles, but there's probably no way that Mick and Keith would have had any idea that Paul McCartney and the Beatles were working on Eleanor Rigby at the same time. But Eleanor Rigby is also a song that deals with a kind of existential angst. In the case of that one, there's Eleanor Rigby, the old woman, Father Mackenzie, the priest, both of whom lonely, working in the same parish, and the only time they come together is after she dies and he does the wedding. It's a very sad, existential kind of tune. Well, we're getting the same thing from the Rolling Stones at about the same time, these lyrics dealing with the angst caused by the grief of a loved one. My little point in this might be about the lyric is that he mentions again and again a red door. I wonder if the red door is really his heart. And so to paint it black means that the red door, that thing through which love opens, the red door that opens for love has now been closed, so painted black. It's no longer colorful. It's without color. It's the color of death. So maybe that's it. That, again, just kind of a personal interpretation to add there. But again, these lyrics do reward a little bit of interpretation, and that's probably more important than what the interpretation is that you come up with. That we have pop song lyrics here that are really more than just words to fill the notes. They really sort of say something and try to say something important. Whether you think they do it in a naive way or a sophisticated way is entirely your own decision to make. Again, the music employs a sitar and a kind of a chant-like melody in the first half of the verse and projects a ritualistic rhythmic feel at the end, all of which consistent with a kind of dance of death kind of thing, right? So I think, again, this shows ambition, this shows sophistication in songwriting, it shows the group taking on new kinds of things. Well, we move on to Mother's Little Helper here. I call this one, with the question mark, Valley of the Dolls. Mother's Little Helper, I'll get to the connection to Valley of the Dolls in just a second here. Mother's Little Helper was released in the US only in the summer of 1966, so it was the hit that was on the charts when the Stones were touring this country in 66. The B-side was Lady Jane, the one I talked about before, which is kind of uses the dulcimer and is kind of the Elizabethan Shakespearean kind of thing. Anyway, Mother's Little Helper was recorded at RCA in December of 1965, and Lady Jane was recorded in March of 66, both recorded at RCA, and both songs by Jagger and Richards. Just to deal with the form very quickly of Mother's Little Helper, just like 19th Nervous Breakdown, it's an AABA form with partial reprise. In fact, it's pretty much exactly the same form. There's an intro and then AABA, and then the reprise is BA, and there's a coda. So you can see with a lot of songwriters, it happens with a lot of groups, you see patterns emerging in the song form. It's kind of the way in which they organize the material that works well. Listeners are able to understand it, and so this is no exception. So the song form, not particularly innovative from that point of view. That Leslie guitar effect, the Leslie is a rotating speaker. If you put the guitar through the rotating speaker, usually associated with an organ, you get this tremolo effect, and that's what we hear at with that little melody that runs all the way through Mother's Little Helper. The lyrics now deal with housewives who ease the pain and boredom of their domestic lives by taking pills. This is a different kind of woman than the one we saw in 19th Nervous Breakdown, a rich woman who seems to have everything but she's empty inside. Here's the everyday woman who's a housewife, who's tasked with all kinds of everyday kind of 60s housewife kind of activities that she finds empty, boring, and ultimately draining. And so she turns to pills as a way of helping her get through each day. And those are, of course, what Mother's Little Helper are. It turns out that there was a book that came out at about the same time. I don't think there would necessarily be any connection between these lyrics and the book, except a kind of a cultural sense of the day, by Jacqueline Suzanne, called Valley of the Dolls. And one of the characters in that novel eases the pain through the use of pills. So the dolls are her little pills. Now, it turns out that book came out in February 1966. The final version of this with the final vocal was recorded in March of 1966. So it's entirely possible that Mick could have read bits of that book or heard bits of it and kind of used it to kind of shape his lyrics a little bit. Or it could be that they both just arose out of the same kind of cultural forces that were questioning the morality of all those people who acted like they were better than everybody else, the straight crowd. And so whatever it was very in tune with its time there with this idea. And of course, the Jacqueline Suzanne book was extremely controversial. Now that might have piqued Keith and Mick's curiosity a little bit. And the big question the song asks is, why are some drugs okay and others not? Of course, the question of whether drugs are okay is going to come up big time in 1967. So just bracket that for further discussion. The music has a country feel, but a sitar-like guitar lick that runs throughout it, as I mentioned before. Finally, the last song I want to talk about is Under My Thumb. This raises the question of misogyny in the music of the Rolling Stones in the lyrics. Now, the song was released on the album Aftermath, was not released separately as a single, or not broadly released in the US and the UK anyway. The album, of course, going to #1 in April of '66 and in the UK, and #2 in June of '66 in the US, recorded in March of '66 at the RCA studios. The form is a simple verse form. There's an intro with the vibraphone there. You think of marimba, vibraphone, that sound. And then the verses come along, just verse after verse after verse after verse. Notice the fuzz bass that that takes place there. So it's really another of these simple verse forms, not unlike Painted Black that we talked about before. Now, to get to the lyrics here, the lyrics tell how the singer has dominated his girlfriend, at some point likening her to an obedient pet. He has her under his thumb. She does what she's told. You know, he's gotten her, he's tamed her. Well, think about this. We had the one debutante who's empty inside but seems to have everything. Then we have the housewife who's empty inside and takes the pills. And now we have the girl who's been sort of, who's been kind of turned into almost a domestic pet. So these songs all sort of turn on a kind of criticism of women. The first two you think are probably justified criticism because there's some duplicity in the behavior, and they're kind of all kind of culture and class kinds of associations that don't have particularly to do with the women. But this one maybe kind of crosses a line. It crosses a line into something which sort of endorses this idea that a man should not only sort of get a woman under control and but that's a good thing. It's something to crow about, something to advertise. And I think that doesn't go down so well these days with a lot of people. It raises this criticism that some of these lyrics, the Stones are kind of hostile to women. And this is not the first time we're going to talk about it. It's going to come back. That's why I'm planting the seed now to say that when we get to things like, Brown Sugar, it's not the first time this kind of thing has shown up in a tune. Of course, I hesitate to tell the stories of Brian Jones and his history of domestic violence. Who knows what happens behind closed doors? People tell these stories all the time, but the guys from the Stones all tell these stories of Brian, slapping women around and this kind of thing. So even if those stories aren't true, that they circulate is probably not very good for this reputation of the Stones as having a kind of a streak of misogyny in some of their lyrics. So just to acknowledge that, think about it what you want. And I promise to come back to the B side of Painted Black, which is called Stupid Girl. And it really is a song about a stupid girl. So if you want to find reinforcement for this idea of misogyny in Stones lyrics, there you have it. Well, let's move on to 1967 now, because we want to get to the album Between the Buttons, which is recorded in late 66, but not released until early 1967. So in the next video, we'll do a little kind of historical survey of what was happening in 1967, some of the things that we need to think about. And then after that, we'll move on to the album Between the Buttons.